Hello and welcome back to Talking Europe. I'm Armand Georgian in Paris. Across Europe, people are being hit by increased food, fuel and electricity bills. Even before the war in Ukraine, the price of energy was rising. European leaders now insist they will not waver in their support to Ukraine, and they admit that helping Kyiv will come at a continuing cost to European consumers. But what sort of cost? And potentially what kind of time frame are we talking about? Well, to try to unpack some of these challenges, I'm pleased to welcome a guest who has had top jobs in the field of international trade at the European Commission, at the World Trade Organization, and at the United Nations. Arancha González Laya also served as Spain's foreign minister from 2020 to 2021, a period marked by a diplomatic crisis with Morocco. She is now the Dean of the School of Politics and International Studies at Sciences Po University in Paris and the first woman to lead that school. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Your pleasure.
Let's start with the economic outlook in Europe. The European Central Bank says that actually the war in Ukraine probably won't tip the Eurozone into recession, but we've heard other warnings about stagflation, so much less optimistic than what the European Central Bank is saying. What do you think the outlook is?
Well, we are living at the moment of economic turbulence. It was the case before war in Ukraine. We were still digesting the consequences of the COVID pandemic and the impact it had on supply, on maritime freight, on international trade, which were basically shrinking on offer. There was also a big shrinking of the demand. So we were still digesting those turbulences when war in Ukraine happened. And it's compounded turbulence. I think we need to be cautious and we need to be balanced because we need to manage three ingredients: inflation, growth, and debt. These three things, we need to find a fine balance. We need to make sure that we signal, firmly on inflation without killing growth, and understanding that we need to spend not just on adjusting to climate and to digitalization, but now we need to increase spending on defense.
I'll come on to that, yeah. But is it really possible to do all three things? I mean, the inflation, some would say, has to be the absolute priority, tackling that, and then thinking about more spending. But you think that's not the right way, that there has to be some sort of balance between the three. Is that realistic, though?
I mean, I think what is happening is you have to act on all three. And to act on all three, you need to find a good balance. We are acting on inflation. The central bank in Europe has sent a very clear signal, and governments are doing their work also at cushioning the impact of inflation on the cost of living of their citizens. They are basically supporting the poorest households in Europe to cushion the impact of increased prices on energy and on food, which are two ingredients that are important for European consumers, especially, as I said, the more modest households. This is happening. So, yes, that is central, but inflation cannot be dealt with in a vacuum. You have to deal with inflation in a context. And the context is one of keeping growth, because that's what will keep helping us add jobs to the job market, which is also what we are seeing. And this is what will help us also in making the necessary investments, public investments, to keep our citizens safe.
Well, if you want to keep on going, continue with public spending and have subsidies for the most vulnerable in society, and have increased defense spending, which of course NATO leaders agreed to do, all of that means that there is one big casualty of all these policies, and that is the national debt. And let's not forget, France's national debt, according to the latest figures, is 115% of GDP. I mean, that's a colossal debt, and it's going to get worse. And that's not viable either, is it?
No, of course, we have to be prudent in how we manage debt, but there is no three ways around it. We've got to invest. We've got to invest in the climate transition. We have to invest in a digital transition, And we now have to be better at investing in security and defense. Now, we in Europe have understood that there is a more intelligent way of doing this, which is doing it as the European Union, thus as the next generation EU to a large extent, where we have obviously increased our debt, but we've done this at terms that are more favorable for each one of us because we've done it collectively. So that's, yes, we've got to spend more. Yes, we have to do this in an intelligent manner. Yes, we have to make sure that we do not indebt future generations in a disproportionate manner. But we are living at a moment of huge transitions, huge transformation. And if we want to have our place in those transformations, we are going to have to make decisions to invest today.
Speaking of big global transformations, the EU has recently warned about a wave of migration from Africa prompted by the food crisis. Do you think Europe is ready for that? I mean, there's not much public talk about this.
No, I mean, we in Europe know what this means because we've seen it before. We are surrounded by neighborhoods that are fragile. And war in Ukraine, thanks to Vladimir Putin, will make this fragility even greater. We are seeing an increase in the food bill of many countries that are very dependent on cereal imports from Russia/Ukraine. We are seeing the energy bill of many countries in our neighborhood increase enormously. This would have as a consequence, obviously, a deterioration of the economic outlook for them and pressures on the migration front. One more reason why we have to work with the United Nations, sending a very clear signal to Vladimir Putin that he's got to help in not aggravating the crisis for many emerging economies and developing countries.
Energy independence obviously has been very much at the forefront of European policy and thinking the last few months. What do you think your country, Spain, should do, both in terms of its own energy independence and helping the EU to be more energy independent?
Yeah, I think we can't think this in national terms in Europe. We have to think this as a European Union. We have to have a proper energy union. And this is something that we are still missing. And constructing this union is more vital today, given the challenge we have ahead of us, which is both a climate challenge. Let's not forget that climate remains one of our big risks. And therefore, decarbonizing our energy mix remains one of our priorities. But now we also have a geopolitical risk, which is a big supplier of energy for us called Russia, that is less reliable today. And therefore, we need to build more resilience. Now, I think that for us Europeans, the priority should be building this European energy union, with the idea that we diversify sources of supply and we invest more in a more determined manner on renewable sources of energy that will ultimately help us decarbonize faster.
Two aspects to that, I suppose. One is more interconnectedness of electricity grids, which is something that Spain has been arguing for a long time. But also, before there can be any kind of energy integration with grids, you have to first address the actual sources, as you said. Do you think Spain is still too dependent on sources of energy from the Maghreb, from North Africa?
No, I think Spain has a very interesting energy mix in Europe and has all the ingredients to be a resilient market on energy. Together with Portugal, by the way, is the Iberian Peninsula. We have more than 40% of our sources of energy that are already renewable sources of energy. We've got regasification plants that can help us with importing LNG that can be inputted into the market. And then we have imports of gas also from Algeria mostly. Yeah. Now, if anything, Spain and Portugal are in quite an interesting position from this resilience that Europe needs. Now, what is missing is the connection of the Iberian Peninsula that can be a hub for energy in the EU with the rest of the European Union. Hence, I think the importance of proceeding with the connection between Spain and France.
The MidiCat. MidiCat, yeah. Does that, I mean, that doesn't completely transform the whole picture, but it would be an important component, wouldn't it? What's holding that up at the moment, though? The pipeline there.
You know, we had in the EU, we had this discussion a few years ago, and we together decided that maybe it wasn't a priority, and therefore we left it unfinished. We had this was a project that had already started, but at some point, the EU, as such, all the member states decided maybe this was not the right priority. We now realize that maybe that wasn't a very wise decision, but that was then, this is now. So let's focus on what we can do now. What we can do now is better connect the Iberian Peninsula with the rest of Europe, with continental Europe, through France, through the Pyrenees, both on the Eastern Pyrenees as well as on the Western Pyrenees. And that will be, it is not the entire solution, but it is part of the solution. And we are at the point where every part of the solution counts.
Okay, we'll have to end it there. Thank you so much. We've now run out of time, but I'd like to thank my guest, Arancha González Laya, and thank you for watching this interview on Talking Europe.